Picture this. You're so broke, you're sleeping in a bus station, eating scraps, and you just sold your best friend for 25 bucks just to survive another day. Now imagine that same person becomes one of Hollywood's biggest legends, worth hundreds of millions of dollars. That's not a movie plot. That's Sylvester Stallone's real life, and what happened next will blow your mind. But here's the crazy part. The thing that made him a star almost never happened because of one stubborn decision that cost him everything. And I'm talking about a choice so risky that even his closest friends thought he'd lost his mind. A decision that would either make him a legend or destroy him completely. Let me take you back to 1946 New York, where everything started going wrong from day one. When Stallone was born, doctors used forceps during delivery, and something went horribly wrong. The forceps damaged nerves on the left side of his face, leaving him with partial paralysis that affects his speech and gives him that signature slurred way of talking we all know today. Now here's what's wild. What seemed like a devastating birth injury actually became his trademark. That slur, that crooked smile, it made him unforgettable in an industry where everyone looks and sounds the same. But back then, it just made him different, and different wasn't always good. Kids made fun of him constantly, teachers didn't know what to do with him, and his own family struggled to understand why he talked the way he did. His childhood was a complete disaster. Parents divorced when he was young, and he got bounced between homes like a ping pong ball. Classic troubled kid story, right? But this is where it gets interesting. Instead of letting it break him, he started dreaming about becoming an actor, and everyone laughed at him. I mean, seriously, who's going to hire the kid with the speech problem and the crooked face? But Stallone had something else. He was obsessed with movies. While other kids were playing outside, he was studying every film he could get his hands on. He'd watch the same movies over and over, memorizing dialogue, studying how actors moved, how they delivered lines. He wasn't just dreaming, he was preparing for a future nobody else could see. Fast forward to the early 70s, and Stallone's in New York trying to make it as an actor. And by trying, I mean getting rejected at every single audition. We're talking hundreds of rejections. Casting directors would take one look at him and basically say next before he even opened his mouth. They'd see the slur, the unconventional looks, and immediately write him off. But here's what most people don't know. Stallone kept detailed records of every rejection. He wrote down what they said, how they looked at him, what roles they were casting. He was turning his pain into data, studying the industry that kept rejecting him, like he was conducting research for a PhD in heartbreak. And the rejections weren't just polite, thanks but no thanks. Casting directors could be brutal. They tell him to consider other careers, that he'd never make it in movies, that his speech impediment made him unemployable. One casting director actually told him he looked like a caveman and should try construction work instead. But wait, it gets so much worse. He was so broke that he couldn't even afford a place to sleep. Picture this, a grown man with Hollywood dreams sleeping in Port Authority bus station for 3 straight days because he couldn't scrape together enough money for rent. That's not just being broke. That's being homeless in New York City with nothing but a dream keeping you going. He'd wake up on those hard benches with his back killing him, surrounded by other desperate people, and still drag himself to auditions. Can you imagine showing up to try out for a movie role when you haven't had a proper shower in days and your clothes smell like the bus station? But he did it anyway, because quitting wasn't in his vocabulary. The cold New York winters were the worst. He'd huddle in 24-hour diners, ordering the cheapest thing on the menu and making it last for hours just to stay warm. The staff knew he was homeless, but most of them let him stay because something about him was different. He wasn't just another lost soul. He had this fire in his eyes that said he was going somewhere, even if nobody knew where. And then came the moment that breaks my heart every single time I tell this story. Stallone had this dog named Butkus, a massive, gentle bull mastiff who was his best friend, his only companion in this nightmare he was living in. But he couldn't afford to feed him anymore. Think about that for a second. You know how much you love your pet? Now imagine being so desperate that you have to choose between your survival and theirs. Butkus wasn't just any dog either. This was the one creature on Earth that loved Stallone unconditionally when the whole world was rejecting him. The dog didn't care about the speech impediment or the unconventional looks or the fact that they were both hungry most days. Butkus just loved him completely, and that kind of loyalty is priceless when you're at rock bottom. So he did what he never thought he'd do. He went to a liquor store and found someone willing to buy Butkus for 25 bucks. 25 bucks for his best friend. Stallone later said this was the absolute lowest point of his entire life, and honestly, I can't even imagine how that must have felt. He literally sold his only source of unconditional love just to eat for another few days. But here's where the story takes an absolutely insane turn. One night in 1975, Stallone is watching a boxing match on TV in a bar because he couldn't afford his own television. Muhammad Ali versus Chuck Wepner. Now, nobody expected Wepner to last more than a few rounds against the greatest boxer of all time. This was supposed to be a tune-up fight for Ali, an easy payday. But this underdog named Chuck Wepner kept getting knocked down and getting back up, going the full 15 rounds with Ali. He got bloodied, beaten, knocked down multiple times, but he just wouldn't quit. The crowd went crazy watching this nobody from New Jersey refuse to give up against the most famous athlete in the world. And something clicked in Stallone's brain. He saw himself in that fighter, the underdog who refuses to quit no matter how many times life knocks him down. He rushed to his tiny, freezing apartment and started typing on this ancient typewriter he'd bought for $5 at a pawn shop. In just 3.5 days, working around the clock, he wrote the entire script for Rocky. 3 days. Most screenwriters takes months or even years, but desperation is one hell of a motivator. He barely ate, barely slept, just poured everything he had into this story about a small-time boxer who gets a shot at the heavyweight championship. But here's the genius part. It wasn't really about boxing. It was about never giving up, about proving to yourself that you belong, about going the distance when everyone expects you to fall. Every rejection he'd faced, every night he'd slept in that bus station, every moment of doubt and desperation, it all went into that script. Rocky wasn't just a character Stallone created. Rocky was Stallone, with all his pain and dreams and stubborn refusal to quit, translated into a story everyone could understand. Now, here's where Hollywood almost ruined everything. Producers read the script and absolutely loved it. They could see dollar signs immediately. This wasn't just a good story, this was gold, the kind of underdog tale that audiences eat up. But they had one tiny problem. They didn't want Stallone to star in it. They wanted established names like Burt Reynolds, James Caan, or Ryan O'Neal, actors who could actually sell tickets and had proven box office appeal. And this is where Stallone made the decision that his friends thought would destroy his career forever. The studio offered him $300,000 just for the script. Remember, this is a guy who just sold his dog for 25 bucks and was sleeping in bus stations. 300 grand was life-changing money, enough to get an apartment, buy a car, eat regularly, live like a normal person for years. But Stallone looked them straight in the eye and said something that still gives me chills. If I don't star in it, the script is not for sale. Can you imagine the balls that took? Everyone around him thought he'd completely lost his mind. His agent probably wanted to strangle him. Here was his meal ticket, his way out of poverty, and he was throwing it away over pride. The studio executives couldn't believe what they were hearing. They kept raising the offer, $400,000, then $500,000. At one point, they offered him close to $1 million just for the script, which in 1975 money was absolutely insane. But Stallone wouldn't budge. He knew this was his shot, his one chance to prove that the underdog could win in real life, just like in his script. People thought he was crazy, and honestly, maybe he was a little bit. But it was the good kind of crazy, the kind that changes everything. He understood something that most people never figure out. Sometimes you have to risk everything to get everything. Safe choices keep you safe, but they also keep you small. The negotiations went on for months. Studio executives would call him up, sure that he changed his mind, that hunger and desperation would make him reasonable. But Stallone had lived through hunger and desperation for years. What was a few more months when he was this close to his dream? Finally, the studio gave in, but they had their revenge. They gave him the role, but slashed the budget to barely $1 million. Pocket change in Hollywood terms. Most movies today spend more than that on catering. They were basically setting him up to fail, hoping he'd crash and burn so they could say, "We told you so," and never have to deal with another stubborn, unknown actor again. They filmed Rocky in just 28 days with this tiny crew and bargain basement budget. Stallone had to do his own stunts because they couldn't afford a stunt double. The famous scene where Rocky runs up the Philadelphia Museum steps, they shot that at dawn with just a handheld camera because they couldn't afford to shut down the area for a proper film shoot. But you know what happened next, and it's still unbelievable. Rocky premiered in 1976 and became a phenomenon. We're talking lines around the block, people crying in theaters, everyone talking about this little movie that could. It made over $200 million worldwide and won the Academy Award for Best Picture. Stallone wasn't just in the movie, he was nominated for both Best Actor and Best Screenplay. The guy who couldn't get a callback was suddenly competing with Hollywood royalty for the biggest awards in the